Control the center, and you can control the game. We may have heard that it's important light-squared bishop and queen to quickly enter the game. A good response for black is to play the same move, e5. By controlling the center, both sides prevent enemy pawns from entering their territory. If white tries to force two pawns in the center with d4, threatening black's pawn on e5, it's important for black to break up white's pawn center with e takes d4. When white's dreams of taking over the center with pawns have been shattered, so black should not have any serious problems in the opening. Is the center really that important to control? What happens if black wants to move pawns on the edge of the board, such as a6? Pawn moves are important when they can control key squares, especially in the center, and when they open up lines for pieces to enter the game. This move does not control an important central square, and it only allows the rook to move to a7, not exactly improving black's position. Since black does not want to control the important center, don't be shy. Let's take the center for ourselves with d4. White's pawn duo control key squares in black's camp, c5, d5, e5, and f5, making it difficult for black to activate pieces on these squares. If black continues to make meaningless pawn moves such as h6, black has no central control, and besides the pawns, only 4 pieces can move: the knights, which were already able to move at the start of the game, and each rook only has 1 square. Not a good start to the game for black. White's pieces, on the other hand, enjoy great freedom. White's queen and 2 bishops enjoy open lines, and white's knights are ready to jump into the game with a move like knight f3. What happens if black wakes up from a deep sleep and decides to start developing pieces toward the center with knight to c6? Pieces need pawns in the center so they are not constantly attacked. Since black does not have a pawn on d5, white can simply march forward with d5, grabbing space and attacking black's knight, forcing it to waste time by moving again. Black should admit the mistake and retreat the knight, but instead decides to move the knight to the edge of the board with knight a5. Most pieces do not like being on the edge of the board, and the knight is especially weak as it only controls 4 squares. Compare this to white's knight on f3. It controls 8 total squares, twice as many squares as black's knight on a5 controls. More importantly, black's knight doesn't have any safe squares, so white can attack this poorly placed piece with b4. If black does nothing, white will simply win a piece. So after knight c4, black's knight has already moved 3 times, and white can now develop a piece and win the knight with bishop takes c4. Black is in serious trouble, but should at least try to prevent white's central pawns from advancing with d6. Instead, black plays knight f6. Knights love to be close to the center of the board, but you have to prevent enemy pawns from attacking them. Since black has not controlled the center with pawns, how can white gain space and attack black's knight? That's right, once again by advancing a center pawn with e5. Black should once again retreat the knight, admitting another mistake, but decides to lunge forward with knight g4. Notice most of black's escape squares are controlled by pawns. Even black's pawn on h6 prevents a potential knight retreat. How can white win more material? If you found h3, nice work. If black takes the e5 pawn, white simply captures it with the knight on f3. If black plays knight takes f2, at least grabbing a pawn before losing the knight, white should not be afraid to move the king. Let's win material with king takes f2. By controlling the center with pawns and actively developing pieces toward the center, white took advantage of black's careless play and is simply up 2 pieces with an excellent position. Now it's time to practice taking over the center in the challenges. As you continue your chess journey, the starting position in front of us is going to be very familiar to you. But how often do you think about the board without any pieces? When you take a look at a blank chessboard, what comes to mind for you? Do you consider it a canvas with unlimited potential, the beauty just waiting to be discovered? Or perhaps you see 64 squares, 32 light and 32 dark. It's very important to become familiar with the chessboard. Specifically, the chessboard looks flat, and all the squares appear the same, but not all squares are created equally. Consider the center squares E4, D4, D5, and E5. These squares are the chess mountain, the highest point on the chessboard. You want to make sure you have your fair share of the chess mountain, or inner center, and the best way to do that is planting flags, or pawns, in the center of the board. You're claiming E4 as your territory on the mountain. Black will often play E5, doing the same thing. The squares surrounding the chess mountain, or inner center, is what we call the outer center. You can consider the outer center as the chess hill, not as high as the chess mountain, but still elevated above all the other squares. When we think about developing our pieces, think about the chess mountain and hill, or inner center and outer center. We want to develop our forces to help control these critical squares. Now that we have a general idea of where we want to place our pieces, let's return White's pieces to the starting squares. Let's pretend for a moment that we can only move 2 pawns and the rest of our pieces only once. Where would you develop your forces? Thinking about the chess mountain, or inner center, we don't have to hesitate to play E4 and D4. Knights love to jump into the outer center and help control the key central squares with knight F3 and knight C3. Bishops love open diagonals, so bishop C4 and bishop F4 are natural squares for these pieces. Take a look at all of the squares these bishops control in enemy territory. Castling has a very important role in our development. For this exercise, let's consider castling as the king move. White's king wisely evacuates the center and now has 3 loyal pawns protecting it. Castling also allows us to bring our rook into the action, especially helping control the center, with a move like rook E1. Now we only have our queen and rook on A1 to move. White's queen can be well placed on E2 or D2. Let's move the queen to D2. Now White's rooks are connected, and White's queen backs up the dark squared bishop, supercharging that diagonal. Finally, we would complete our development with rook A to D1. Notice our 2 central pawns, knights, and bishops are all in the inner and outer center. White's major pieces, the queen and 2 rooks, help support the center, so in the future, White can start advancing pawns up the board. Of course, this is only a dream scenario, and our opponent